And Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome to the Ruach Emet broadcast. It is wonderful to be with you today on this glorious day. My name is Rabbi Darryl Weinberg of A Light to the Nations Messianic Ministries, and we are broadcasting through lambnetwork.tv or messianiclambradio.com. And we are grateful to the Lord to be here today to help you to explore the Word of God, and grateful for all of you who are regularly tuning into this broadcast. And for those of you who are brand new, we welcome you too, and trust that we will at least not get you running away screaming so that you will come back again. We're going to get right into it. I got a powerful message that the Lord has given me this week, so I'm going to ask everybody rise for the blessing of the reading of the Torah portion, as we want to honor the Word of God, because David says in Psalm 34 and verse 8, taste and see that the Lord is good, and he is the Word that became flesh. The blessing before the reading of the Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bacha banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah. Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has chosen us from all peoples and given us his Torah. Blessed are you, O Lord, giver of the Torah. Our Torah reading is from the double parsha, Matot and Maseh, which means tribes and journeys of. And we'll be reading from Numbers chapter 31, verses 1 through 12. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take vengeance on the Midianites for the children of Israel. Afterward you shall be gathered to your people. So Moses spoke to the people, saying, arm some of yourselves for war, and let them go against the Midianites to take vengeance for the Lord on Midian. 1,000 from each tribe of all the tribes of Israel you shall send to the war. And so they were recruited from the divisions of Israel, 1,000 from each tribe, 12,000 armed for war. Then Moses sent them to war, 1,000 from each tribe, and he sent them to war with Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, with the holy articles and the signal trumpets in his hand. And they warred against the Midianites, just as the Lord commanded Moses, and they killed all the males. They killed the kings of Midian, with the rest of those who were killed, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, the 5 kings of Midian. Balaam, the son of Beor, they also killed with the sword. And the children of Israel took the women of Midian captive and their little ones, and took as spoil all their cattle, all their flocks, and all their goods. They were also burned with fire the cities that they dwelt, and all their forts, and they took all the spoil and all the booty of man and beast. And the blessing after the reading of the Torah portion. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Torah emet, v'chayu laham nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai notein haTorah. Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has given us a Torah of truth and planted life everlasting in our midst. Blessed are you, O Lord, giver of the Torah. Blessing before the Brit Chadashah reading. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu Mashiach Yeshua, v'hadibrot shel habrit chadashah. Baruch atah Adonai notein habrit chadashah. Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has given us Messiah Yeshua and the commandments of the new covenant. Blessed are you, O Lord, given of the new covenant. We have 2 New Covenant readings. One is Revelation chapter 15 and verse 1. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels, having the last 7 plagues, for in them the wrath of God is complete. And we will also be reading from Matthew chapter 16, verses 1 through 12. Then the Pharisees and the Sadducees came, and testing him, asked that he would show them a sign from heaven. And he said to them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red, and in the morning it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and threatening. Hypocrites! You know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it, except the sign of the prophet Jonah. And he left them and departed. Now when his disciples had come to the other side, they had forgotten to take bread, and then Yeshua said to them, Take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they reasoned amongst themselves, saying, It is because we have taken no bread. But Yeshua, being aware of it, said to them, O you of little faith, why do you reason amongst yourselves, because you have brought no bread? Do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many baskets you took up, nor the 7 loaves of the 4,000 and how many large baskets you took up? How is it that you do not understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees? Then they understood he did not tell them to beware of the leaven of bread, but the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. May the Lord give increase to the reading of his word. And the blessing after the Brit Chadashah portion. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan lanu hadvar ha'emet, v'chayu olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai notein habrit chadashah. Amen. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has given us a word of truth and planted life everlasting in our midst. Blessed are you, O Lord, giver of the new covenant. Amen. You may be seated. Once again, we bid you all a warm and hearty Shabbat Shalom, and it has indeed been warm lately, at least certainly here in the southern Ontario region. It is times like this where you are thankful for air conditioning. Bill Engvall, the comedian from Texas, is primarily known for his comedy skit line, Here's Your Sign. The essence of it is that when someone asks a stupid question, it would be easier, he says, to answer them if you knew they were stupid and had a sign stating so. And so when someone asks a ridiculous question, he'll say, nope, and then respond sarcastically. So, for instance, one day, and this is apparently a true story, he pulls into a gas station, and the gas station attendant, he pulls into the station, he's got a flat tire. And the gas station attendant says, You got a flat? And he says, Nope, the other 3 tires just swelled up. And then he goes, Here's your sign. In other words, next time you're going to ask a dumb question, just hand the sign so I know you're going to ask a dumb question. But apparently the station attendant says, well, warm weather will do that. Another time he said he was going to do a show, and so he was in this little prop airplane. And as they were coming down onto the runway, they hit a deer and killed the deer, and then the plane got destroyed, and so they had to get into a vehicle and I guess shuttle off to another plane or something like that. So he calls his wife, and he says to her, he says, honey, you're not going to believe this. He says, we hit a deer. And he says she paused, and then she says, oh my goodness, were you on the ground? And he said, nope, Santa was making his last run. Another time, he was fishing on the dock, and there was a bunch of fish there, and some guy said, you catch all them fish? And he says, nope, talk them into giving up. So he's made a whole career of this. It became his signature line, very much like John Paned. He for a while there, he would say, oh, nay, nay, and you knew exactly what it was. And so Bill Engvall's claim to fame is, here's your sign. And it's hilarious. You've never heard it. It's quite the humorous listen. But you know, it emphasizes that signs are actually important in our lives. They help us to understand, either in words or pictures, something that we need to know, like, when to stop. You have a stop sign. Or, of course, you have traffic lights, and that's also another side. You'll have street names so that you know what street you're going down. You'll have signs that tell you what the hours of operation are. And what I found out is that when you're trying to look up, what time something's open to on the internet, the signs don't always match up with truth. And another very important sign is where the bathrooms are. Now, when my wife and I were flying through Germany a number of years ago, as we were coming back from Europe, um, we saw a sign, and so I kind of said, um, "Well, there's the bathroom." She says, "Where?" And I pointed at the sign, and she starts laughing because she says, "No, no, no, that's the guy going onto the escalator." She says, "Why would you say that that's the sign for the bathroom?" And I said, "Well, it looked like he had to go really badly, and he was running." Well, needless to say, she had a difficult time catching her breath after that because she was laughing so hard. So there was a sign, and I apparently needed one of Bill Engvall's. So, we look at our passage in scripture that we read last week, and we talked about John chapter or Revelation. I don't know why I keep saying John. Revelation chapter 15, and it says the very first verse that, and then I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, seven angels having the seven last plagues, for in them are the wrath of God complete, are complete. And we talked about last week how Bible Hub says that a sign, as at least this one is talking about, is typically miraculous, and it's given especially to confirm, corroborate, or authenticate. And it then emphasizes the end purpose, which exalts the one giving it. So, of course, in this case, God. Accordingly, it is used dozens of times in the New Covenant for what authenticates the Lord and his eternal purpose. Very key, especially by doing what mere men cannot replicate or take credit for. And God, all throughout the scriptures, is giving signs to Israel, giving signs to the nations, giving signs to individuals to reaffirm that he is the Lord. Signs in Revelation. Remember, we talked about that there are three of them. You had Israel as a sign, you had the devil as a sign, and then you have the seven angels with the wrath of the bowls of the wrath. They're all signs, and they're a testimony to the peoples of the earth, but there are many different types of signs in the Bible. For instance, in Genesis chapter 1, we're told that the sun, the moon, and the stars are all signs for seasons and days and years. And so we get our time signatures, and they all revolve around the cycles of the earth around the sun, or the moon around the earth, or the rotation of the earth. That becomes difficult if you believe the earth is flat, and I'm not sure what we do with that, but we won't get into that. Interestingly enough, though, is that the only time period that we have that has nothing corresponding to it in the heavens is the 7-day week. And yet every culture around the world has had that. During the French Revolution, they tried to change that to a 10-day week. And like the rest of the revolution, it failed miserably. But that was the purpose of the celestial bodies, is that they were to be assigned to us. Cain had a sign on his forehead so that nobody would kill him. So remember, he says, God tells him he's banished from the land. He's not going to be able to work the land anymore. And he says, "Oh no, your penalty is too harsh," ignoring the fact that he just killed his brother. It's amazing how murderers get all whiny when it comes back on them. But anyway, so God appoints a sign for him on his forehead and says, "Whoever touches Cain, let him be avenged." And some theologians have postulated that that sign was actually the swastika. Not sure how they came to that, but I've heard that before. The rainbow is a sign from God that he would never flood the earth again, and that it is a covenant that God made with man. So we know that it is everlasting, because even today we still see that there are bows in the sky after the rain, which means that God's going to stop the rain before it gets out of hand like it did that time. Circumcision, a huge sign. It is a sign of the covenant with God and the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, although Ishmael was circumcised too. But what God said is that circumcision was a sign of the covenant for the land. And so, by the way, for those Christians who are saying that Israel is illegitimate, I wrote a blog article about this, and we also did a message on this a couple of months ago. If you want to go back to the blog article, go to the website, alttnmessianic.com. You see it right there at the bottom of your screen. Go to the blog section and read the war in Gaza and the rise of anti-Semitism. And one of the very interesting phenomena that I'm seeing out there today is that there's this rise in anti-Semitism amongst supposed Christians, including people like Candace Owen, including many people. Stu Peters, for instance, claims to be a Christian, which I highly doubt, but nonetheless. But the anti-Semitism that comes out of these people's mouths, and one of the things that they're saying is that Israel has no right to the land. I was just reading an article by a guy today who said that Israel is the main problem in the Middle East, not the Iranians who are bombing everybody. And so when Israel finally retaliates, then Israel's the problem. Just unbelievable. But if you want to know who the land belongs to, well, is it belonging to the Palestinians? Is it belonging to the Israelis? God made this very clear, and the covenant of circumcision was specifically for the covenant that God made with Abraham. What was the covenant with Abraham? I will make a great nation out of you. The two things that you need to have a nation, in order to have a nation, are land and people. And so God said he was going to give them all the land from the Mediterranean Sea to the Euphrates River, from the river to the sea. It all belongs to Israel. It's not the Jordan River, it's the Euphrates River. It's much more expansive. And we know that covenant hasn't been fulfilled because never has Israel owned all of the land. They came close under Solomon's rule, but never did they have all that they were promised. And it will be an eternal covenant until the new heavens and new earth. And then we have no idea what it's going to look like, because the New Jerusalem is going to be 1,500 square miles. I mean, that's half as big as the continental United States. So that's going to be very interesting. So the covenant of circumcision is a sign that even 4,000 years later, and it was an unconditional covenant, it had no bearing on Israel's obedience, disobedience. Did they get kicked out of the land for disobedience? Yes, they did. But God's promises that they were always going to be brought back. And so we can see that today, that it's still a covenant and a sign which is in effect. And so for every Jewish boy or Gentile who wants to identify with the Commonwealth of Israel, then they will get circumcised and they will be affirming the covenant. God performed miracles through Moses to show Israel and Pharaoh that he was Lord. It was a sign, it was a testimony to Moses, to the children of Israel. Well, I'm not a good speaker. What am I going to say to them? And how are they going to believe me? Well, God says, you do a couple of these things and they will believe you. And same thing with Pharaoh. It was a sign to Pharaoh that he was the ruler and above all the gods of Egypt, which Pharaoh foolishly did not take heed to. Of another very interesting sign, and we get this in 1 Samuel chapter 4. So, the Philistines defeat Israel in battle, and Israel gets the brilliant idea of bringing the Ark of the Covenant into the battle, as if this was a magic talisman, and if we simply rubbed it, then God would be beholden to do whatever they wanted him to. And it is a misconception that we have today. And so what happens is that Israel gets routed, 30,000 die. Hophni and Phinehas, Eli's sons, who were doing all kinds of wicked things, die. Eli then hears about the ark being taken and his sons dying. He falls over backward. He dies. And then his daughter-in-law, she dies giving birth to their son. And I think, Hophni, um, and they named someone named the boy Ichabod, which means the glory has departed from the Lord. The glory of the Lord has departed. Terrible. So what happens is that the Philistines, they take the ark, they bring it into Ashdod, and they put it into Dagon's temple. And this is where things get really humorous, because they come in the next day. So the ark is placed before Dagon, the statue of Dagon. Dagon was he was a hybrid. He was a chimera, so probably a Nephilim, and he was half man, half fish. And he wore a mitre, kind of like the hats that look almost like a fish head. You know who wears that same hat today? The Pope. If you look at the Pope's hat, it looks like a fish hat. Where did he get it from? So they put the Ark of the Covenant in before this Nephilim, and they come back the next morning, and what's Dagon doing? He's lying flat on his face. Well, the Philistines help the poor guy up because, every good God needs a hand once in a while, right? Just amazing. If he was truly to be worshipped, then why on earth do they need to prop him up? So anyway, they do. Well, the next day they come back, and Dagon is lying again face down, except this time his hands and his head are cut off, and all you've got is the torso. Now, what's very interesting is that it says this verse that to this day the priests of Dagon, when they enter the temple, do not step on the threshold anymore. Why does it seek to mention that? Because threshold covenants were extremely important in the Middle East. And when Israel was commanded to slay the Passover lamb and put the blood on the lintel, what would happen is that the blood would drip into the threshold, and there was actually like a bowl or a catch basin that was built into the houses. Why? Because whenever you would have a guest in the house in Middle Eastern, in the ancient Near East, is that they would slaughter an animal at the threshold, and the blood would drip into the catch basin, the bowl, okay? And then when you stepped over the threshold, you wouldn't walk on it, you would step over it. It is because you were then treated as family. So when Yeshua says that the thief comes in another way, he comes in through if he crosses over the threshold, he is considered to be a family member, and therefore, as he is subject to the rules of the family, he has to honor the family. So if you defile that, if you step on the threshold, you are then perceived to be an enemy, but you are also not subject to the rules of the house. So if a thief comes in over the threshold, it is a huge dishonor. Okay? So what they would do is they would sacrifice an animal at the threshold, and then the guest would come in. The reason why the priests would not step on the threshold anymore is because there was a change in authority. With Dagon lying face down with his hands and his head chopped off, it showed that the God that was in the Ark of the Covenant, Yahweh Elohim, was superior to Dagon, and therefore the priests had to honor that God instead of their own. So there's all kinds of symbolism, but what was the point? The point of Dagon lying down at the threshold was that he was defeated. It was a sign to the Philistines, and that's why they sent the Ark of the Covenant back, along, of course, with the tumors that they got and the mice and the rodents and everything else. There was obviously a plague that went along with that, and they said, we got to get rid of this thing here. It was a sign. God shows signs and wonders all the time in order to prove himself to glorify himself. And a lot of times we miss out on these things because we're not aware of it. The Sabbath was a sign that he is the Lord who sanctifies us. We get that from Exodus chapter 31. Manna and water in the desert is a sign that he was on their side. But of course, they rejected that, and they kept wanting to go back to the meat pots in Egypt. False prophets will perform signs and wonders, and God allows that to test people to see whether they're chasing after the sign or that they are actually interested in God. And much of the charismatic movement today is all about the signs and wonders, and doesn't really matter who's doing it. If you get a sign, then we're gonna chase after you. Signs can be for our amusement. We've seen some hilarious signs before. There was one that said dead end, and it was right in front of a cemetery. That's funny. Another one is there was a sign in front of a church that says Easter comes once a year. How often do you come? Hopefully more often than that, but certainly not on Easter. There was another sign that says, I was addicted to the hokey pokey, but I turned myself around. And then there was a really funny one from a dry cleaners that says, lipstick on collar, need alibi, stop here. Tongue in cheek. So, the question then we ask is, well, is it okay to ask God for a sign? Or is it presumptuous to do so? Well, do we have any biblical examples? Well, I'm glad you asked. We have Gideon. Gideon was given a pretty absurd assignment when you think about it. God shows up and he's threshing wheat in the wine press. That's not where you thresh wheat. But he couldn't do it out in the threshing floor and throw the wheat up in the air, because then as it was flying around and the chaff would be flying, then the Midianites would see and they would come and attack and they would take the food. So he was doing it in the wine press undercover. Well, God says to him, I want you to deliver my people. I want you to go defeat the Midianites. Gideon's looking around and he's going, you talking to me? God says to him, oh, you mighty warrior. And Gideon's like, there must be someone else in the room you're talking to, because I'm hiding out here. And he says, I'm the least in my family, and we're from the tribe of Manasseh, which was when, who am I? God says, no, I want you. And Gideon says, okay, but you're going to have to prove this to me, okay? He said, I'll go do it, but you really got to affirm this. And he says, so he puts down a fleece, a skin with wool on it. And he says, make the fleece wet and the ground dry. So God does. And then he does it the opposite way. Well, make the ground wet and the fleece dry. And so God does it. So Gideon was asking a sign, and you can see that God was very patient with him. I remember when I was on my search for faith, I was wondering whether Yeshua was the Messiah or not, and I was really wrestling with God on this 3-year journey. And I remember I went for a walk one night, and this is when I lived in Toronto, and so I went for this long walk, and it was quite warm. I guess it was summer, and I remember saying to God, if Yeshua is your son, you need to tell me in a way that I will understand. I was asking for a sign. I said, otherwise, I don't want anything to do with him. I believe, actually, I said to God, if he's not your son, then take him away as far away from me as the east is from the west. And I don't even remember where I had read that, because I hadn't read my Bible before I'd gotten saved. And so, I'm walking, and I come to the edge. It was the side street that I was walking on. And I walked out onto the main street, and this is where, right where the Jewish Community Center was, in the north end of Toronto. And there was a building just up the street, and it had a big sign out front, and it said, "We believe." And I looked up at God and I said, "That's cute, but you're going to have to do better than that." God gave me a sign, and it was part of the affirmation. I can remember that clear as day because it was part of the process that God used in order to bring me to faith in Yeshua the Messiah. So it is okay to ask for a sign. And, I did that the other day. Um, it has been a quite challenging time for us the past couple of months. And we've been hit on a number of different levels. I've shared that with some of you. Last week, we put out an appeal for some extra donations if it was possible, because that's one of the areas we've been hit in our finances. But there was a lot of other things that we were struggling with. I woke up the other morning and I just said to God, I said, you need to let me know that everything's going to be okay and that you're in my corner, which is what I was essentially saying. I was asking for a sign. And that morning, I had to go to a funeral. A friend of ours, her husband passed away rather suddenly. He was diagnosed with lung cancer about 2 months ago, and it was very quick. And so I was going to the funeral, and on this particular morning, my wife had to go to work. So she was taking the car. So what I did is I found that there was a coffee shop, um, a short, about 20-minute walk away. So I said, just drop me off the coffee shop before you go to work. I'll, spend some time reading there, and then I'll walk to the funeral home. Well, as I was walking to the funeral home, I passed this store, and this store caught my attention. And the reason is because there were a bunch of signs out front. Now, why is this important? Well, we just moved last month, and um, we had to get a coffee bar. We had to get a stand for coffee stuff. And my wife and I have been talking about getting a sign over it, whether it be coffee station or filling something like that. We were discussing the idea of it. So I thought, there are signs in this store. Well, let's go see if they have any coffee signs. So I walked in, and there's tchotchkes everywhere. Okay, it's one of those knickknack stores, and they got cute little sayings. A lot of these signs. And I asked the owner, and I said, "Well, do you have a sign for coffee?" And she starts bustling around. She said, "I know I've got one here," but she couldn't find it. Anyway, we start getting into this conversation, and she was talking about, I mentioned the fact that I was in pastoral ministry and I have an online ministry broadcast, and she's talking about her relationship with God, and she's talking about how she speaks to Him, and then she mentioned something about hoping to get to heaven. And so I asked her, I said, "Well, do you want to know how you can be absolutely 100% assured that you're going to go to heaven?" I said, "If I was to tell you exactly how you can do it and there was no questions asked, would you be interested?" She says, "Yeah." So I shared the gospel with her, and I have this formula that I use that I've developed over the years, and it's been very effective. And she said, "Oh, that's great." I said, "Well, would you like to receive the Lord into your heart right now?" I said, "I'll pray, and then you can just follow me." She said, "Yeah." And so we did. We prayed with her to receive the Lord. She actually gave her life to the Lord and was born again. And as soon as she stopped, um, she said that she felt lighter. I called her actually the next day, and I said, "How you doing?" And she said, "Just feeling terrific," and she slept really well and everything else. So this, we're obviously going to keep in touch. I did tell her God says we have to make not converts, but we have to make disciples. So we're going to want to start plugging you in. But she had gone back to church. Now, what was very interesting though is that I found out that she came from a Jehovah's Witness background, and that although she and a couple of her siblings had left the faith a number of years ago, a lot of her family still is. And she's just gone through a really rough time over the past few years. She lost her husband and her sister-in-law and her mother-in-law all within a short period of time. She battled cancer herself. So there were all these things. And she was constantly crying out to God. That very morning, she had asked God for a sign to just kind of the same thing that I was asking, that, are you still with me? Is everything going to be okay? And so as I was passing by, I looked, and there was these signs outside that drew me in, but that was really the sign that I needed, that I needed to go talk to this lady, that there was a kingdom assignment in there. And so what God does is that he'll use signs, as we see all throughout scripture. But in my case, in this woman's case, it was a literal sign that was used in order to bring us together, that I could share the gospel with her and lead her to faith. An amazing story. It just blessed my heart so much. And then, I went to the funeral, and I texted the widow afterward, and I told her the story, because um, Angie had just come to faith a couple of years ago. And so, she's hot for the Lord, and she wants to please him, and she wants to grow in her faith. And so I told her the story, and I texted her, and I said, even in your time of grief, as you're mourning, God is using your husband's death in order to draw other people to him. And she texted me back later and said, that's amazing, and thank you so much. And I could tell it really ministered to her. So it was a beautiful story. I got ministered to, because it showed that I'm still within God's will, even though we've got all these struggles. Because you know what? As mature as many of us are in our faith, and as long as we've been walking this thing, sometimes you just get worn out. And sometimes you need affirmation, you need a reminder, you need that little cookie from God, as a friend of mine many years ago once said. You need these little cookie crumbs in order for God to let you know, yes, the battle is fierce, and he's training us, he's disciplining us, but he's there, and we are in his will, and he's pleased with us. And it was what a whole bunch of us needed to hear. It was what the lady who I led to the Lord needed to hear. It was what I needed to experience. I needed to be used by God for a kingdom assignment, and not just, keep learning how to duck. So it was amazing. And yet, we have this passage in Matthew 16 that says that the Pharisees and Sadducees came and testing him, asked that he would show them a sign from heaven. And he answered them, it is evening and it's morning in this red sky. Hypocrites, you know how to discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. Well, I was seeking after a sign. This lady who prayed with me to receive the Lord the other day, she sought after a sign. Does that make us wicked and adulterous? What's the contrast here? What's the key? Well, it goes back to the primary thing in why we do anything, and that's motivation. Why were the Pharisees and the Sadducees asking him for a sign? Because they were testing him. There was no need for them to ask him a sign. If you read Matthew 15, he had just finished healing a bunch of people, and then he fed the 4,000, which, you multiply, you've probably got 18 to 20,000 people, when you include women and children. And this is the second time he's done that, because he did it previously, not a few months before, and he fed 5,000. There was no need for them to ask him for a sign. So what they were doing? They were testing him. They wanted to see if they could trip him up, but also, here's the key, is that in John chapter 10 and verse 23, they come to him, the Pharisees, and this is at Hanukkah, celebrating Hanukkah. And they said to Yeshua, if you're the Messiah, tell us plainly. He says, I've already told you, but you don't believe me. What's going on here? It seems to be a pretty ridiculous conversation. If you're the Messiah, tell us plainly. He says, I've already shown you. I've already demonstrated. But you're not listening. John the Baptist, when he goes to prison, he asks, he's the one who declares, this is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. John knew who this was. That was Yeshua's cousin. But things kind of went sideways for John. And then he says, well, are you the one, or should we be waiting for someone else? What was Yeshua's answer? He didn't say, of course I am. Why would you even ask that? No, what he said, what are you going to tell John? He says, the eyes of the blind will be opened, the ears of the deaf will be unstopped, the lame will leap like a deer, and the tongue of the mute will shout for joy. You tell John, see, that was a quote from Isaiah 35. You tell John, the lame walk, the blind see, the dead are raised, and the gospel is preached to the poor. What are those? They are signs that he is the Messiah, just as he said he was. So, John, I know that things are going the way that you thought that they should. When did they ever? But your circumstances do not change the fact that I am who I said I am. And that is, the plan is still in place, even though it's not going very well for you at this time. So, what were the Pharisees asking him in John chapter 10? If you're the Messiah, tell us plainly. Well, I've shown you. I have healed people, healed a man born blind. That's never happened before. Never happened. And yet he did it. Raises people from the dead. He goes, in the next chapter, he goes and raises Lazarus from the dead. So what were they asking him? Well, if you go to First Maccabees chapter 4 and verse 46, it tells us that after they cleansed the temple, when they kicked the Assyrians out, Antiochus Epiphanes, and it says that they were cleansing the temple, they were rededicating it, which is what Hanukkah means, and they come to the altar where the pig had been sacrificed. Well, the stones are defiled; they're no good. So what do they say? Well, you know what? Instead of just throwing this away, what we're going to do is we're going to put the stones aside, and we're going to wait for a prophet. First Maccabees chapter 4 and verse 46. We're waiting for a prophet to come and tell us what to do with it. So you fast forward to John chapter 10, and you've got the Pharisees coming to Yeshua saying, well, if you're the Messiah, tell us plainly. In other words, our definition of the Messiah is someone telling us what we're going to do with the stones. It had nothing to do with God's definition. It's that they had created God in their own image. The Messiah was going to help them figure out what to do with these stones that have been lying around all dirty for 200 years. We do that all the time. We ask God for a sign. And Jews are notorious for this. I mean, Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1 that the Jews seek after a sign, but the Greeks seek after wisdom. Jews are always asking for a sign. They want something miraculous. They want God to almost perform for them. And he did. He did do that in the desert, but they still rejected it. So signs and wonders aren't enough. But what it does is it adds to the condemnation. Now, our example this week is that the sign that God gave us was sufficient. It's what got me in the door. And then a conversation ensued about the gospel. It helped confirm to her that God was in her corner and that he gave her the gift of salvation. It helped confirm to me, it was my fleece, that God was still okay with me. And even though things have been challenging, that we're still on track and we're still being used for the kingdom. All these different things. So when we ask for signs, we got to be careful that we don't fall into the same category as the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were called a wicked, adulterous generation, because God just finished performing all kinds of signs, but it wasn't enough for them. It's the same thing that when Herod, so we remember Herod when Yeshua is on trial there, and he's anxious to see Yeshua. He'd been trying to see him for a long time, and Yeshua's kind of avoiding him. The king wants to see him because, all these miracles are going on. So Herod is delighted. Oh, Pilate finally calls him and he says, listen, this guy's from your territory. You need to deal with him. And Herod's saying, finally, I get a chance to see this guy. Why? He was anxious to see Yeshua because he wanted him to perform a sign. It was almost as if, he thought Yeshua was some sort of circus clown, a magician. And you're going to do tricks for me. And Yeshua refused to say anything, and Herod got frustrated with him, and so he began to mock him instead. He wasn't really seeking after truth. You see, the reason why, in my case, in this lady's case, it was okay to ask for a sign because we were truly seeking after God. God, we want to know that everything's going to be all right because things haven't been. And we need some demonstration. Gideon was okay to ask for a sign because he was being asked to do the impossible, which is, of course, what God always asks us to do, right? He never gives us an assignment that's easy because then what? He doesn't get the glory. He could have wiped out Pharaoh immediately. He could have just taken the whole thing out and said, okay, you're free to go. But no, what did he do? He gave signs and wonders, judgments, the plagues, in order to demonstrate that he was superior to their gods. Because you look at what Exodus says after they get out, it says in Exodus chapter 12 that all of the plagues were a judgment against Egypt's gods. Same thing with the story with Dagon. Down on his face, on the threshold, I'm in charge of this house now. That's, by the way, going back to the whole threshold thing. That is why the tradition of carrying the bride over the threshold when you get married, it's so she doesn't step on it or she doesn't trip or something like that and invite the evil spirits to come in. Because evil spirits also must be invited in. You see that in all the vampire movies and stuff like that. They're actually based on truth and how the spiritual realm works. And so what we do, the guy picks the bride up and he carries her over the threshold so that she gets in okay. She's not going to mess it up and trip or something like. Now, if the guy trips, then we have a huge problem on our hand. But here's your sign. But no, he's protecting her. You see, the evil spirits have to be invited in. That threshold is a sign, and what we do with it is a sign to the spiritual realm. 1 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul says that a woman, when she prays and prophesies, she must have her head covered. Why? It's a sign to the angels. What does that mean? To the fallen angels, the ones who in Genesis chapter 6 decided to leave their proper abode, and they came down and had relations with the women and bred the Nephilim, and God got so angry that he flooded the entire world. So when a woman prays or prophesies, it says that she is to have her head covered to demonstrate that she is under her husband's authority. Angels, this one's off limits. You don't get to touch. And if she's single, then she's married to Yeshua. They're still off limits to those fallen angels. It is a sign. It is a testimony. And those are the things that we need to be careful of. So when we are asking God for a sign for something, the one thing that we have to check is with our heart, what is our motivation? Are we asking God to perform for us? Are we asking for signs and wonders because we're amused by them? Or do we really need an indication from God that, yes, everything is going to be okay, or that you're going to take care of this? In our Parsha reading, we have the wiping out of the Midianites as a sign to Israel's armies not to mess with them. Because if you look back, they only had to send 12,000. It wasn't that. I mean, you've got hundreds of thousands of fighting age men. I mean, Israel was a huge army. And that's why Balak hired Balaam in order to curse them, because they were such a large people. They could have wiped out the Moabites, which they eventually did. But he was asking for a sign. And so when the Israelites go in and destroy Midian, and they're to wipe them out, it was a sign to the rest of the nations that you don't mess around with God's covenant people. When Iran fired all of their drones and things like that back in April of this year, and I think there were one or two that got through out of like 300. It was a sign that God is still protecting Israel. And so when Israel this week took out both the heads of Hamas and Hezbollah within a couple of days of each other, and both of them got killed, one within Lebanon, right in Beirut, which is supposed to be kind of off limits. And then the other one, the head of Hamas, was killed in Tehran. And the Iranians had no idea. It was a message from Israel to their enemies, primarily Iran, because Iran sponsors all of this. You still got the Prince of Persia that's running the show over there. He hasn't gone anywhere since the angel that was sent to give Daniel the message was stopped by him for 21 days. Same guy is still in charge. And he's a murderous thug. But it was a message from the Father that even though Israel isn't walking in obedience right now, he's still their covenant people. And that if you go messing with Israel, and you're going to send in rockets, and you're going to send, I mean, what's Israel been doing the past 9 months? They have been systematically taking out all of the heads of Hamas, no matter where they are, including right in the heart of Tehran. It was 750 meters or something like that away from the president's residence. Somehow or another, they got in there, and it was a sign to them, don't you mess with us, because we will come. When Iran shot all of those missiles, Israel's response, everybody figured Israel was going to go nuclear on them, literally. And they fired, I think, one missile. And that was it. And everybody, well, what happened? What did Israel do? That was kind of a tepid response. Well, no. The missile that they shot destroyed a radar station or something like that. And it completely bypassed their air defenses. And what Israel was telling Iran, it was a sign to them that our weaponry is superior to yours. And if we truly chose to, we could eliminate you, no problem. See, God kept doing that to Pharaoh. God kept laying waste to Pharaoh's gods and the Egyptian gods. The Nile River was a god. Oh, I'm going to bleed all over it. How do you like that, God? They worship the frogs. You want to worship the frogs? Have as many gods as you want in your house. They worship bugs. Dung beetle. This beetle that pushes poop around. They worship those things. And God was judging each and every one of them. It was a sign that I'm superior to you. So when we go to God and we ask for a sign, we got to make sure that our heart is right. Because God is pleased when we ask him to glorify himself. He was pleased with Gideon. He was pleased with Manoah and his wife. Samson's parents said he performed wonders. He was demonstrating to them who he is. And so as we saw this week, if we seek after God earnestly, then he's going to show up in miraculous ways, and he's going to prove himself to the glory of his name. And so, Abba, we thank you today that you are a God of wonders, and you are a God of miracles, and you are a God of signs. But we also know, God, that there are false prophets who will do signs and wonders, including the false prophet in the book of Revelation, that's going to deceive people. So we pray that we would not be deceived, and we would pray, Father, that what we are after is your glory and not our own entertainment. We commit all these things in the mighty name of Yeshua. Once again, we pray that this has been a blessing to you. If you liked the message, please share it. Give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to our Rumble and YouTube channels. You can watch the replay for a week on lamnetwork.tv and in the archive section. But if you want to go back later on, you can go to Rumble and YouTube. Make sure you've subscribed so you get the notices when the new messages are up. And if, once again, you are able, please donate generously to this ministry as we are still fighting through the crunch. God is demonstrating himself to be faithful, but we're not quite out of the woods yet. But this past week was a huge blessing and an affirmation that God is in our corner. And so we want to pronounce the benediction over everybody. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, this is how you shall bless the children of Israel. You shall say unto them, Yivarechecha Yahweh v'yishmerecha. Yaher Yahweh panav elecha v'yichunecha. Yisah Yahweh panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom." Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make his face shine upon you, be gracious unto you. Yahweh lift up his countenance upon you, give you shalom. They shall invoke my name upon the children of Israel, and I shall bless them. Go in peace, in the assurance that God will affirm your prayers. In Yeshua's name. Shabbat shalom, everybody. See you soon. If you missed today's show, or want to watch it again, or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lamnetwork.tv, where you can find this show and all the other live Lamb Show archives in the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network. We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take a tour of the lamnetwork.tv website. I'm Darryl Weinberg, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.